Welcome to the open source dependency / whatever disaster podcast. Actually, let me try that again. Welcome to episode 349 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kellett.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. I hear you might have some news.
I do indeed, and I'll try to keep this brief. But I have left my previous employer, SalesLoft, as of this past Friday, and I am on the market looking for a new gig. So open to consulting, open to fractional part-time work, open to full-time work. If you find my particular brand of security skills and snarkiness of interest, reach out. Maybe we can work together.
So yeah, you've been in the industry for a very long time, and I've done all the things. So
too long, some might say, but
too long.
But I'm also happy to take a little bit of a break, right? I was at SalesLoft for 5 years, including what some deemed the largest SaaS breach of 2025, and it's been an exhausting year, and I'm happy to take a little bit of a break. But if the right opportunity, the right interesting thing pops up, I'm just trying to find something that excites me again, that gets the juices flowing, as they say. And but if that takes time, I'm okay with that too.
Cool. I really enjoyed time off, so I highly recommend it. That's my advice.
Unfortunately, I still probably have to be careful about what I say about SalesLoft and the drift breach, because lawyers are going to lawyer. But I could probably be a little bit more open about other things.
Yeah, it's the way of the world. So no worries. But anyway, congratulations. Seriously, congratulations on your mini retirement. I know it's not actually Thanks. Retirement.
Well, if it turns to that, I might have to come live on your couch. So let's hope not.
It's true. All right. So next up, I want to say thank you to our Patreon sponsors. Thank you very, very much. And I will remind everybody that if you do want to have the high honor, the great privilege of listening to our shows a week ahead of everybody else, if you want to get like the inside scoop, you want to know what's happening in the world before everybody else, this is how you do it. Right? You want to know what the latest your mom jokes are? Like right here, right now, this is how you do it. Doesn't cost much, and it helps make the world a better place. Let's just be honest.
We like to think so. Others might disagree.
That's okay.
I guess it depends.
They're entitled to their opinions.
It depends on your opinion on enhanced interrogation techniques at CIA black sites, because that is one of our primary use cases. Is they force suspects and whatnot to listen to our show until they break.
It does seem like we should be the recipient of some grant from the DISA or the CIA, but no, they just use our stuff like it's open source.
That's almost like a hint of foreshadowing of a story we're going to talk about.
That's right. I published a video about how open source is, where anybody can just come along and drop their own bugs into code, and I still make myself laugh over that. So I found it more funny than anybody else. But that's the way.
If you can make yourself laugh, that's okay. But in all honesty, thank you as well from me, honestly, to our Patreon donors. You guys are amazing. It always is humbling and crazy to me that some of you just give us money to do our little show, and we really do appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. And also a reminder that, well, at least for some of us, the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and not those of our employers. So someday maybe neither of us will have employers to have to worry about.
I mean, I could make a few phone calls and get you fired. Is that what you want?
No, I need the health benefits.
Fair enough.
All right. So getting into some stories. The first one we have for tonight comes from the Hacker News. And the title here is Claude Mythos AI finds 10,000 high severity flaws in widely used software. Oh my God. Can you believe this is unreal, like catastrophic. Can you believe 10,000
Clearly,
vulnerabilities?
the predictions of the Vulnpocalypse were accurate, and we should all
totally accurate.
go
Totally
hide.
accurate.
I'm crawling into my bunker as we speak and just bracing for the end.
So Project Glasswing has helped uncover more than 10,000 high or critical severity vulnerabilities. Of these vulnerabilities, 6,202 have been classified as high or critical severity flaws. Okay. Following me so far, right? A subsequent analysis of these vulnerabilities found that 1,726 are valid true positives.
Hold up. So we're now down from 10,000 to 1,700?
So far. Let's hang on because it gets crazier.
All right.
All right. Okay, so as many as 1,094 flaws are assessed to be either high or critical severity. So it's not actually 1726. It's more like 1094. Okay. All right. Okay. So, but wait, there's more. In all, so all said, these efforts have led to 97 bugs being patched and 88 advisories being issued.
But it said 10,000.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
So what we're finding is a lot of flash in the headline, not leading to a whole lot of bang in the details.
Yeah, so I think that's my takeaway. Now, look, we've said before that Mythos is probably going to be written in history as one of the most effective marketing campaigns in human history. Like, it's just been an amazing thing, like to the point where governments are convening committees to figure out how to mitigate the impacts of mythos specifically on like human civilization. So it's kind of wild. I think the thing that concerns me from a practical standpoint, I mean, look, I'm not going to knock it. Anytime we have an opportunity to find and fix vulnerabilities, I think is a worthwhile endeavor. And so I'm going to start off by saying that. But I think one of the challenges I see with this, and we're starting to see it come up more and more. We talked last time about how Linus Torvalds is, starting to cry uncle about the number of vulnerability reports that are coming in, aided, from bug hunters aided by AI. And I think the his comment there was a lot of them are like the same thing, just found over and over and over again. I don't know. There's no real context here about how, like, are the rest of them duplicates? There's 10,000 found, but most of them are duplicates, or did they actually just not pan out to be what they were initially thought to be? But I think the net challenge I see is that's a lot of noise in the system. Like, a lot of noise in the system.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm so conflicted on this one because I think anytime we find more vulnerabilities, that's a good thing. The vulnerability exists whether we know about them or not. So if we're becoming aware of them, that at least gives us the opportunity to mitigate them. Two things that come to mind here, though, is to your point, with this level of, for lack of a better term, false positive percentage, do we start to get into alert fatigue around these findings and start to tune them out and start to ignore them and miss the valuable finding in the middle of all the other false positives, which is bad? And how much time do software engineers have to go assess and fix these things? Which is, to your point, what Linus and others have referred to, which is that they're getting so many reports that it's distracting them. And it's the other thing I think about is this is probably the least capable these tools will likely be going forward. They'll probably continue to iterate and continue to get better. And the question always becomes, is this a short-term spike where we get through the now low-hanging fruit that these tools have exposed to us and get back to a normal sort of expected velocity of vulnerabilities? Or is this the new normal? I don't know. And or can we use these sorts of tools earlier in a development cycle to find more bugs and vulnerabilities before they ship to prod, and again avoid this huge spike externally? I don't know. I think there's so much existing code out there to be assessed. This could take years to get through. And we're generating so much more code now, faster than ever before. I don't know if this is ever going to calm down. This may be the new normal, and I don't know that we're well geared to deal with it yet.
That's the challenge I see ahead. And it's not a situation where everybody, every software maintainer has a similar capability or capacity for handling things, right? Like there's, as we've talked about ad nauseum, like there's small open source packages which are incredibly important to the software ecosystem, that don't have the luxury and the the high investment tooling to put into place that a company does. And so I think this is going to be probably with us for a while, but I don't know. It'll be interesting because I also think we're starting to see some, as we'll talk about coming up later in the stories, we're starting to see some innovation happening in the code repos. And so I wonder at some point, do we start seeing code repos being more proactive about vulnerability identification in code that's being imported into their system? So I that's a wild ass speculation, but
that's what we typically do on this show.
I don't know where it goes otherwise. The other concern I've got is a lot of code these days is being written or materially augmented by AI. And let's be real, AI is basically using human written code as the map for what it's generating. And a lot of the human written code that it's learned on probably has vulnerabilities too. And so
right.
I think we're going to be in this race for a long time.
Yeah. One thing that I did find interesting about this particular article is something I didn't know, which was that, quoting from the program, the AI company, which is Anthropic in this case, also said it launched a cyber verification program that allows security professionals to use its models without guardrails for legitimate purposes such as vulnerability research, penetration testing, and red teaming, similar to OpenAI's Daybreak, which also allows defenders to leverage GPT 5.5 Cyber for specialized workflow. So, and I kind of drilled in a little bit of what it takes to get authorized, but that sounds pretty interesting if you're a defender. Though I still come back to the problem that I've often had is not the ability to identify bugs. It's the ability to get enough time from the software engineers against product development requirements to get these bugs fixed. And that, I think, is because you see, and we talk about it later, and I actually have it in my notes later about how security teams are not patching fast enough. I said, it's not the security teams that are typically doing the patching. It's the asset owners. It's the code owners. The security teams are the ones identifying the problem. So we as security teams are reliant on those other teams to do the patching 90% of the time, most environments. And by the way, I think it should be that way. They should own their code. And I very much am cautious of security folks getting into fiddling with prod code, and then the people who own the code going, wait, what did you do? Why'd you do that? Like, there's a whole Pandora's box there of pain in my mind. But this is not necessarily a limitation on the security teams in my mind from a velocity standpoint of patching. It's the asset owners. And I don't know that we're talking about that as much.
It's, I mean, this comes back to something we've talked about on and off for a long time. Those asset owners are, especially if you're talking about developers, they're typically in a lot of companies, not in all companies, but they're kind of where the money comes from, right? Like the thing that they are
Yeah.
creating is what generates the money in some way, or it supports the generation of money. And for every erg of energy that you put towards fixing vulnerabilities rather than developing new features, you're losing out, quote unquote, on potential revenue. And so I think that's the struggle, right? That's the trade-off. And I'm not justifying, and I'm not saying that I agree with it, but I'm saying
No,
that is the
but it's real.
business decision that is happening all day, every day, in thousands of places, around tens of thousands, millions of places. It's just reality.
There is a counterbalance to that, which is customers of software shops asking third-party risk management questions around these things. But I think that there is this concept within most businesses at an executive level. You want to minimize the amount of time you spend doing security work and maximize your time doing product enhancement work.
Yeah, yeah. There was a I think a hope. I'll call it that. The U.S. government a couple years ago issued some guidance that was going to mandate some software development standards for software that the government would procure. And one of those would be that the software wouldn't have any known, at the time of production, it wouldn't have any known higher critical vulnerabilities in it. And that's been kind of put out to pasture since. But I think in concept, it makes sense. I think the government was trying to throw their weight around to kind of bully the industry into doing something. But I think ultimately it's going to take something along those lines to really meaningfully drive change. But the other side of it is that right now we're talking about using these tools primarily to identify the vulnerabilities, and then to also, as they talk about in here, to write exploit code for the vulnerabilities. But at some point, perhaps we get to a point where it can actually not just identify but fix the vulnerabilities. And maybe that's something. Of course, then those fixes will probably have their own vulnerabilities, but then I'm sure we'll have technology that identifies and then fixes those as well. So
You
anyway,
just need to buy some more Blinky boxes and rub some AI on it. It'll be fine.
more and more and more AI. But I don't know where this is all headed. But it's fascinating seeing the dichotomy between the headline number and like the actual net impact. And
Agreed.
by that I mean the headline number of 10,000 versus the net impact of 88 patches. So there you go. All right. Our next story comes from the Tenable blog, and the title here is Key Findings from the Verizon DBIR 2026 report. Slower vulnerability remediation meets faster exploitation. Dun, dun, dun. So a couple of interesting headlines and takeaways in here. They kind of distill it out into three key takeaways. And keep in mind, they're looking at it as a vulnerability identification company. They're looking at it through a particular lens, but it doesn't make the data any less correct. And so I thought it was interesting to talk about. First takeaway was that vulnerability exploitation is now the leading initial access vector for breaches. And as we talked about, this is something that swings back and forth over time. Sometimes it's vulnerability exploitation, sometimes it's phishing. It's a pendulum that goes back and forth. But their investigations or their report found that 31% of breaches involved vulnerability exploitation as the initial access method. So that's pretty interesting. especially given what's going on recently with the dearth of 0 days we've been seeing.
Yep.
Security teams are, and this is something I think you were talking about. Security teams' patching efforts are falling further behind, with a median time to patch growing by 11 days in the past
Yeah,
year.
I got pre angry about that one before we even got to the article.
And then the third is AI powered tools increase the speed and volume of vulnerability discovery and vulnerability exploitation, exposure management, help, blah, 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 right? AI, whatever. So this is, a pretty good report. We've talked about it ad nauseum. I actually didn't realize the 2026 one had been released yet, but we'll have to go through that on a future
Indeed.
episode. So, there were a couple of other little nuggets in here that I thought were worth covering about how, in the report, they identified that only 26% of vulnerabilities in the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities list are being fixed, which seems weird. And so I don't fully understand that one, because is that at a certain point in time, or is it implying that it's never fixed? I don't know. I don't have a good handle on that yet.
I think there's lots of potential reasons. It could be that customers or employers, companies, people with stuff just don't have time, or that they are prioritizing it differently, deprioritizing, like, well, it's not exposed to the outside, so I'm not going to patch this right now. Or, yeah, there could be a lot of reasons, or they may not be aware. Not everybody uses the Kev as a prioritization source, which pros and cons there, but it is interesting. I mean, it tells us that even if we go one step further, of all of these things we're talking about in the last article, vulnerabilities being found, software engineers have time to actually fix the vulnerabilities, and then nobody has time to actually apply the patches. Right. So that's we've got this cyclical problem of people having time to deal with these problems. But I did think it was very surprising and a big change. I want to point out that vulnerability exploitation is taken back the top spot from social engineering, which had been the top for many, 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 many years. And that, I think, is a big deal. That is definitely a sea change. And I think a lot of people kind of default into this view of, well, social engineering is more dangerous. It's what, so this is something I think should be better understood, that has changed recently. And from a reliable data source like the Verizon DPIR, I think is important to double click into and say, hey, I understand why we thought this way for many years, but it's changing. The world is changing, and we have to adapt.
I will bet that there will be a shift, and it might not come out on top, but I bet there'll be a shift next year where a credential theft is the number one for 2026. It's seeming just I feel it in my bones. That's where we're going.
So some people, when they have an old injury, they can feel the rain coming. You, with your old injuries, can feel breach, source, root cause trends coming. That's right. Very interesting.
I can feel it. There were a number of other interesting data points in here. One was they have a breakdown of software by category that has unremediated vulnerabilities, and the number one category, it's fascinating given the context of everything that's going on in the world right now, is development tools.
Yeah, I caught that too. It's in my notes too as fascinating, but not surprising to me.
No.
Developers have typically been the last bastion of free reign, Wild West oversight from IT and security teams. Mm-hmm. They can do whatever they want on their machines. However, I think that's going to have to change. I think between stuff like this and what we're seeing with the supply chain attacks and how we're seeing so many developers now getting popped by plugins that they're loading to their AI tools or third-party dependencies they're downloading or unauthorized, uncleared third-party tools that developers are grabbing right now. How many times are we seeing that be a real problem in the real world? And I think this is going to be a huge culture change and a big source of conflict with developers. But I think if I predict out into the future, the way things are going, I think IT groups and security groups are going to start locking down those development environments and only allowing safe, vetted tools as best we can to be pushed out and taking away the ability and authority for those developers to do whatever they want. And it sucks, right? They're going to hate it. But I think the bad guys have now figured out that this is such a soft underbelly that we have no choice but to respond to it and reduce the free reign of our developers in ways that they're going to hate. And I don't know what the second order impacts of that are going to be, but I don't think we can let them just grab anything they want and play with anything they want anymore. I think it's going to have to be a lot more, given how targeted they are, I think it's just going to have to be a lot more controlled for most companies.
Yeah, we talked a bit about this last week. I really think that developers are going to head in the same direction, head down the same path that privileged administrators, domain administrators, whatever, were wrapped in protection, 20, 25 years ago, with the advent of like the Red Forest and the privileged access workstation and all that crap. I think we're going to start seeing similar kind of design patterns emerging for development. And, up until recently, I have seen a lot of like development pipeline best practices, but I think it's going to necessarily have to extend out to the end workstations of developers too. And I think you're right. This is not going to be super popular, but is necessary. Like if you go back to like the SolarWinds breach, I don't know how many years ago that was. Like that, I feel like that was the big starter pistol. I mean, obviously there were supply chain breaches before then, but that it feels like that was like the unofficial start of the supply chain hellscape that we find ourselves in right now.
Yeah. At least the one that caught enough press for us all to notice.
Right.
Had enough of a big impact. Yeah, I agree.
All right. So moving on, our next story. We have not had a good Krebs story in a long time. So we're back though. This is from Krebs on Security, and the title here is CISA admin leaked AWS GovCloud keys on GitHub.
This one's so frustrating to me, but yes, please.
He's really amazing. So the story here is that CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, whose name I absolutely hate. I just want to point that out. I will point it out at every opportunity until the day I die. Because
interesting enough, they say the same thing about you.
Well, that's probably true. Anyhow, they apparently had a GitHub repo, which I mean, to their credit, it was labeled, it was named private. So
it should be left alone then.
Right. It's kind of like when you put something on your risk register, like when you can't, you descope something from your pen test, or like you can't patch, that firewall, or you can't upgrade that firewall. Like you put it on your risk register and now it is out of scope.
Right. And bad guys just are not allowed to go after it. And
they're not allowed.
It's just, right. Look,
so it's the same thing.
Right.
Same idea.
I agree.
Same idea. So the repo name was private-CISA. I don't know how any more clear it could be. It was private. And here we have this researcher from this so-called Git Guardian apparently poking into the private but public repository.
I was going to say, for the record, it was toggled to public, even with the name private. Somehow, it could have been like a multiverse thing, an incursion. It could have been, I don't know. I don't know how, but somehow somebody made it public.
I'm sure it was accidental.
But
Almost
yes,
certainly is. So anyway, this Git Guardian, they are known for trolling GitHub repos, looking for evidence of leaked credentials, and apparently they found the mother lode with this one. And the perhaps the really bad part was the researcher was not able to get CISA's attention. That they would not acknowledge the problem, and so this researcher reached out to a couple of different reporters, including Krebs, and it wasn't until Krebs and another reporter contacted CISA that they actually made the repo private, and then took some other actions. But in any event, this repo had all sorts of stuff, including, as the title implies, some AWS keys for CISA's AWS GovCloud instance, which, if y'all don't know about AWS GovCloud, obviously it's probably got some sensitive stuff in it. It's also super expensive. So somebody could have run up a pretty big bill fairly easy. But they also found there were files, like CSV files containing passwords, like dozens for dozens of internal systems. Let's see. They also had discovered that some of the passwords were like the name of the system and the year. Like that was the password. It was like, Jira 2026. I'm making that up, right?
Perfect.
That sort of naming scheme. So it's fascinating. Now there's really been not a lot of acknowledgement about this. It appears like it was associated with a contractor, not with an employee, which is surprising because I don't know that there's that many people in CISA left anymore. So it was a contractor with a company called Nightwing, or at least allegedly. And the hypothesis is that this repo was the result of some kind of like automated syncing between the person's personal laptop, which is kind of concerning, and this repo. And the repo was apparently around for like 6 months. Looks like it was created back in November of 2025. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. But I think, if I think about it from an enterprise security standpoint, there's there's some obvious lessons, but the one that I wanted to hit on is that we often, especially if you got developers, are implicitly trusting GitHub. And so, like, you might not see a problem, or you might not detect or infer that there's a problem if you see connectivity between, one of your people's computers and GitHub. But as is the case here, that's not always the case. The other thing that occurred to me, and I saw this a lot when I was at my previous employer. We had a private instance of GitHub, which was, only accessible to our organization. But then we also had people with publicly accessible repositories because, we did, developer stuff or customer consumable stuff. And there were a number of times that things that should not have ended up on that public repo did, because people got confused.
Yeah, it's really easy to mess that up.
So, it could be like the the difference between github.com/CISA and CISA.github.com or github.cisa.gov.
But if you put private in the name,
But yeah, I mean, I come back to it had private in the name, and here we are talking about it. Like, how did we end up here?
well, the thing that's so maddening to me too, this is from the article too, is that let's see. Specifically said the GitHub account that exposed the CISA secrets exhibited a pattern consistent with an individual operator using the repository as a working scratch pad or synchronization mechanism, and they intentionally disabled. Let's see. Noting the commit logs in the offending GitHub account show that the CISA administrator disabled default setting in GitHub that blocks users from publishing SSH keys, or other secrets in public code repositories. So they went out of their way to turn off the protections to stop this.
My guess is this person set it up and it wasn't working, and so in order to get it to work, he had to go turn that setting off.
It is maddening. Look, you absolutely full stop, never ever should be storing any secrets in GitHub, in my opinion, ever. Even if you think it's fully private, even if you think it's fully like the private repos have this maddening ability to get leaked. And the problem is that the commit histories are always there. So even if you switch it private again, like that key is forever leaked. It's always out there. You can never really screw it. You have to rotate it. And in my career, leaked keys has been the number one problem I've run into. And a large percentage of that time is by mistakes and misunderstandings and accidents with tools like GitHub. So I think you just cannot trust it to ever store secrets. There are better solves. There are better solutions. It's easy. It's super easy to store secrets in code and store that code in GitHub. And it takes a lot of discipline and a lot of smart execution to not do it. But it bites companies all the time. And it's just, it proves two things. The basics matter, but it's also hard to get the basics right consistently. And this is, frankly, just really sloppy and dangerous use of the tools. And I also think it's kind of common.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing that we haven't talked about is, obviously these were committed to a public repo. And I would say that even if they were committed to a private repo or an internal repo, that's still problematic. Even if they were never committed to any repo, it's still problematic. These kinds of keys should be stored in some kind of a secrets management solution, right? I mean, this is the freaking year 2026. Like, these are well solved problems. This is laziness. It's either ignorance or laziness, and I don't know which one is worse.
I agree 100%. So, and anyway, I'm not going to get into any of the political angle of this. I know some people could say, well, this is because his budget's been cut, all this kind of, maybe, but this is just very, very basic blocking and tackling that we should know better.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to rings of protection. How do you offer to your people the ability to store secrets securely? Do you train them on how to use it? Do you have an ability to detect when they deviate from that? Do you make sure that people aren't committing the wrong kinds of code to public repositories? And so there's a lot of opportunities to intercept this sort of thing, and none of them happened here. So
indeed,
hopefully it's a lesson that we can all learn from. All right, our next story, speaking of stolen keys, comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is Grafana Breach Caused by Missed Token Rotation After TanStack Attack. So there's been quite a few people, or quite a few organizations impacted by this TanStack breach. And what's interesting about Grafana is that they're kind of like a second order victim of it. So they were consumers of TanStack, and TanStack had been compromised by the Team PCP as part of one of the many iterations of the Shai Hulud repo worm, as I know like to call it, which stole Grafana's keys. And the reason that happened was Grafana's automated CI/CD workflow, went and grabbed the latest TanStack update once it was available and incorporated it into its workflow, which in turn sent its keys over to the adversary here. And what to Grafana's credit, they apparently pretty quickly realized that it happened, and they did what they thought was required. They rotated what they believed were all the keys that were impacted, but they went through an assessment of all the different workflows they believed were involved, and excluded one, inappropriately, by the way. And that workflow was also part of what had been impacted, and its key was also stolen, and they didn't rotate that, which allowed the actor to then exfiltrate a bunch of Grafana data, which initially was reported as just internal Grafana operations data, no customer data. But then later they expanded that to include business contact information of customers. So things like email addresses and names and maybe phone numbers. So not great, but look, this is now, I think, the fourth or fifth time in very recent memory where a company caught an incident early enough but didn't do all of the steps required to mitigate the compromise and got bit because they didn't have a thorough game plan on rotating their keys.
Yeah, it can be complicated. And especially these sorts of workflow issues in things like GitHub can be very complex and not always intuitive. And to your point, if you're trying to decide this in the heat of the moment, in the middle of the crisis, you're probably not going to make as great a decision as if you plan this out ahead of time in peacetime and actually tried it and exercised it. And mind you, that takes a lot of discipline, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy away from doing other stuff. But during the fog of war of these incidents, stuff can get missed like this, and it's easy to miss it, and it's a tough problem. I feel for him, but at the same time, the bad guys don't have any sympathy if you miss something like this.
It's as we have objective evidence. So what occurs to me is that companies like Grafana have some pretty talented automations people. They are, that's objectively the truth. My sincere recommendation is that if you are if you are beyond a certain level of sophistication and complexity, that you really should be spending some amount of those people's time to create automated, like fully automated workflows to rotate all of your keys, which by the way means that you need to know what all of them are, where they all are, what they all do, what they all control access to,
and keep it current
and
every time it changes.
Right. And but then have that be automated and on some periodic basis exercise it, because otherwise you're like, this is very, it feels so much like the inflection point with ransomware, back 15 years ago, whatever. Now this isn't like if it happens to you, it's going to happen, right? It is, this kind of thing is going to happen if you have a dependency on on this sort of workflow. It's going to happen to you, and so you can either get ahead of it, or you can do it when after you've realized that you've been compromised, then you have to go scramble around and figure out like what keys do we have and how do we rotate them and what impact does that have and how do we manage that impact. We're way beyond the if this is going to happen point. It's now it is going to happen. It's really a matter of when. So I
You
would
bring up
say get on it.
you bring up a great point too of managing and understanding the impact. I think a lot of companies with secrets in general, maybe not necessarily in this particular workflow, don't build with the idea that they have to rotate that secret easily,
Right.
and then get surprised by the downtime or the disruption or the pain. If you go in from the very beginning with the concept of whatever secret in any sort of authentication workflow, any sort of service account, whatever, that I'm going to have to rotate it with very little notice. How do I build with that in mind? Now, I can't tell you what that looks like exactly because every situation is different. But if you go in with that mindset, you're going to save yourself a lot of pain later. We're like, oh, I can't rotate this because it's going to break this other thing. And then it's going to cause all these other downstream impacts. And we just can't rotate it. Like, not being able to rotate a secret is not an option. You have to build for that, in my opinion. And if you can do it up front, all the better.
That I had this similar challenge when I was at my last job, but it was more in the context of patching. And what I was working to institute was a design that required the ability for things to be patched. Like you had to design it so that you could consistently patch on SLA. And we that was not a popular position because a lot of times that was interpreted as, well, like in the worst case scenario, if something really horrible happened and you told us we had to, then we could patch according to SLA, but like that would require a heroic effort. And so I think both with that and with credential rotation and probably many other things, it's really important to bake those requirements in a very clear way so that it's not subject to interpretation. It's just very clear what the objective is. And I don't think it's, if you design it from the get-go and that with that in mind, it is a much easier problem to solve than trying to re-engineer something that's already in place. So fun times. All right.
Indeed.
Our next story comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is GitHub links repo breach to TanStack NPM supply chain attack. So while the last one with Grafana was a second order impact, this one is a third order impact. It's pretty fascinating. So GitHub, for those of you who are living under a rock, because this has been covered far and wide, GitHub had about 3,800 internal repositories, which you got to ask, what are they doing with 3,800 internal repositories? Stolen.
Being well organized. Look.
Obviously. So storing all their passwords very methodically, right? They're all neatly sorted into different repos.
Correct. Look, somebody's OCD, and I appreciate it.
So this happened as a result of a compromised plugin for VS Code called NX Console. And what is very interesting here, I find super interesting. NX Console is a plugin for VS Code that itself was compromised in one of the many Shai-Hulud attacks. Actually, I think it was using a component that was compromised in Shai-Hulud, and then it was itself compromised and weaponized. And so, fascinatingly, allegedly, the tainted versions of NX Console were available for like minutes, like 18 minutes. And in that 18 minutes, someone with the right level of permissions and access installed, downloaded, installed the malicious version. Now I don't know if that was like a net new install, or if, like, they got a auto update pop up, and that is what caused it. That part is not clear to me, but regardless, somebody installed the malicious version, and that leaked the credentials, which allowed an adversary to access 3,800 internal repositories. And I still go back to, like, why are internal repositories accessible from the internet? But I guess I've lost that battle.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
zero trust, right?
SAS has taken over the world.
Because zero trust.
100%. Right. Now, what you could argue is, why is a stolen credential able to be reused from an unauthorized third party and a third party host? That, I think, is a good question. The interesting thing here is our own advice is coming back to bite us right now. How much have we preached auto update, auto update, auto update, auto update, patch as soon as you can? And now it's being used against us.
Well, heck yes.
And that's frustrating.
Oh, yes.
So, and I've seen that meme floating around, like, security people, patch as much as you can. Also, security people, don't patch as fast as you can. And, like, yeah, we know we're screwed right now. We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. So there's probably some middle ground. And the problem with easy bumper sticker advice is these edge cases change all the time. And so now it's like, okay, patch within 30 days, but not sooner than 5 days, unless it's a Tuesday in a leap year. Like, it's a hard problem.
You want other people to find the problem before you apply it, and get, you want other people to be the ones to get compromised before you install the potentially malicious package. But that's a hard gamble. It's a really hard gamble, because sometimes it also has a vulnerability, that if you don't patch it, you could be exposing yourself to a different problem, and if you do patch it, you are exposing yourself to this problem. So it's a tough problem. I think, as we've talked about, this is a problem that has to get solved. Like this repo worm supply chain issue has to get solved, because it is absolutely, completely freaking unsustainable. It is breaking so much of the industry right now.
Agreed. And I think it's going to have to happen at the repo owner level, or the repo systems level, not the repo owners, right? Like the GitHubs, the
PMs.
The NPMs of the world, I think, are, even though it's not necessarily their fault, right? They're giving you all these powers and abilities and controls, but they're just being used so much to just kick the industry's ass, that I think it's going to force these repo SaaS vendors to respond.
Now you hit on something that's pretty important, I think, which is, if you're not going to put your internal systems behind quote, behind a firewall, right? If you're going to have them accessible from the internet, you really should be limiting where those authorized, where the keys are able to be used from. Right? There should be some limitations on that. Now, we don't know. I mean, maybe there were, like, maybe they had that in place and the bad guys found a way around it. I don't know, but I'm guessing probably not. But I think it's super important, and a relatively straightforward precaution to take. And not only that, by the way, if you see someone trying to use a legitimate key from an illegitimate location, that should be setting off alarms.
Right. 100%. Yeah. Like impossible travel. Like, this guy just logged in from San Francisco and now he's logging in from someplace in China. Nope, I don't think he is.
Yes.
Mind you, that's not perfect. Like, there's always ways you can bounce it off VPNs and bounce it off compromised hosts. I get it. The other thing is, how do I tie this? Again, we've gone back to this. We've talked about this a lot, but a lot of these API keys and SSH keys ultimately become single factor authentication tokens. And once stolen, can be reused from anywhere. That's a problem. But most of them have some sort of additional configuration option that limits that, whether it's something as simple as IP whitelisting, whether it's something like device trust, whether it's a proof of possession, like a two-way handshake. There are options. Just a lot of people haven't gotten them set up. And I think that's where we need to also increase that vigilance and make sure that, hey, if this key gets stolen, how do I make it a lot less usable to a bad actor? And there's solutions. We're just not using them.
Right. So interesting. This while GitHub hasn't publicly said who the threat actor is, Team PCP is running around claiming that they have about 4,000 repos worth of private code from GitHub, and is asking for $50,000 to get access to it. So it seems it seems pretty clear that that's probably the same thing. But Team PCP is also the threat actor who compromised the code that ended up allowing the compromise of NX console, which allowed the compromise of GitHub. And so then you have to start asking the question, like, how much of this is contrived? Like, by that I mean, how much of this is planned out? Like, do they have a list of targets that they want to compromise, and they continue to find clever attack paths until they get to where they want to be?
Maybe. I think with like a spreading worm like this, or I think it becomes opportunistic because you don't know how far your blast radius is going to go, but you hope it goes far and you get interesting targets.
True. So I think that the takeaway for me is, there's not a lot of protection around some of these plugins. Like, I don't know if you're running CrowdStrike, if it would even have the ability to detect this malicious version of the NX console plugin. I don't know. Maybe it would. Maybe it would detect a call out. But then, because it's a developer system, is it even running CrowdStrike?
Yeah. Back to the point we were talking about earlier. How do you start reining in these developer systems?
Yeah.
And what I think honestly happens is once these become popular or make enough press, tools like CrowdStrike, and not EDR vendors in general, will add specific detections. The question I always have is, what if it's still a 0-day? Do they have innate default detections that would pick this up?
Mm-hmm.
I don't. My gut, without any evidence one way or the other, is probably not, because this is such a unique, specific area, and developer workstations do such weird stuff all the time that you would either have a ton of false positives, so in which case you turn it off, or this is so subtle, this behavior is so subtle, I don't think most of your EDR tools are going to pick it up. That's my gut feeling.
Yeah, probably not. I know, and I don't know. I don't know the mechanism that this NX console, the malicious version of NX console, used, but we know that in other contexts, the Shai-Hulud worm, which was in some way written by or associated with Team PCP, the same threat actor who's responsible for this attack, allegedly, would dump. They would actually use GitHub as like an intermediate storage path, right? And so, like, if you were looking at the actions potentially of this malicious version of NX console, it might just look like it's making a contribution to another GitHub repo.
Right. How's it going to know the difference?
So that's the we just need a lot more maturity on this. And I go back to, I think we have to figure out how to put controls in place where we're able to, like limiting where otherwise valid API keys and GitHub keys are able to be used. So that's what I think we got for this one. So on the good news front, our next and last story comes from the Hacker News. And this is something that you've been predicting for quite some time, is now coming to pass. NPM adds two-factor gated publishing and package install controls against supply chain attacks.
Yeah, it's inevitable. I think that more of this kind of stuff's going to be shown up. I'm glad they did it. Kudos to them.
So I don't know if this is mandatory yet. Hopefully it will be at some point. But the intention here is that you can continue to have your automated workflows, but the most you can do with those automated workflows, and I'm oversimplifying to a fault here, the most you can do with those automated workflows is get the package to a staging location in order to make the final push so that it's available for to the masses for download. You have to prove who you are. You have to log in or authenticate with a multi-factor credential to prove that it's you. And so it's not enough just to use a key that could be stolen, which has been what's happening. So it seems like a very prudent step. We'll see if there's some creative ways around this, but I think this is a huge leap in the right direction. So I am very happy to see this. I hope it takes off. I'm sure there's probably lots of groaning in the developer community because now, like, their fully automated workflows, now require a manual step, which I'm sure is, you got people running around saying this is an anti-pattern because that's what they do.
That's what they do. I know, but reference everything we talked about earlier in the show. Developers are the targets now, and I think we have to adapt to address that.
Yes. So this is good news. This is, we don't often get to talk about good news.
Do we cover good news on the show? When did that start?
It was good that we were able to give some good news.
Fair enough. I applaud GitHub for doing this. I think you're going to see more and more of these package repos vendors having to do this, should do the same, having to do the same. The risk is if they mandate it, and then there's a lot of whiny childish BS developers who say, I don't want to do that. It's an anti-pattern. And then they're going to keep getting their ass kicked. As opposed to...
What kills me is that it's not... I mean, certainly those developers are impacted to some extent, right? But it's everybody else that's bearing the brunt of the harm. So,
sure. Kind of like when you published your naked freeform dancing video.
I have already apologized for that. I don't know what more you want out of me.
More therapy.
All right. On that note, on that happy note, you've made it to the end. Congratulations.
You gained 1 CPE.
You got your CPE, which means that we both are down 1 CPE. So now we have to go earn
return
2.
Return to the CPE mines.
That's right.
You got a new one.
That's right. All right. If you want to find links to the stores we talked about, go to our website. It's defensivesecurity.org. Look for episode 349. We do continue to have the best YouTube channel in the known galaxy, not the universe yet, the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. So just look for at Defensive Podcasts, and you will be blown away, stunned beyond belief. It's so amazing. Hey, look, I'm selling it. Okay,
okay.
I'm in sales mode right now.
Okay, well, I mean, sure.
They can make their own decisions once they get there,
and offer a full refund if necessary.
That's right. You can support our little venture here by going to patreon.com/defensivesec and signing up for however much you feel like you can afford, and get the high honor of listening to our episodes a week ahead of everybody else. And with that, where can people find you?
You can find me, especially if you want to hire me or do some consulting or just, hit me up for cool projects, on X and infosec.exchange, which is your amazing Mastodon server. Same handle at Lerg, Lerg. Also, I'm on LinkedIn. You'll find me there. I'm usually pretty easy to find. How
I,
about you?
we should put your. I got to put your LinkedIn handle or your LinkedIn link here.
That's true, but if you can't Google it at this point, I have a pretty unique name.
That's true.
But
All right.
fine. Please do. Help the one person who wants the help.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can find me on infosec.exchanges at Jerry. And with that, we are at the end. I hope you have a great week, and we will talk again real soon.
Have a great week. Bye bye.
Bye.